They say forgiveness heals the soul. A neat little platitude, isn't it? Easy to say when you haven't had your life ripped out from under you by the very people who were supposed to be your sanctuary. My name is Sophia. I'm 30 now, and if time truly healed all wounds, the scar on my soul wouldn't still throb with a phantom ache on cold nights, or when I hear a certain tone of voice, that sharp, accusatory pitch that can still, even now, make the hairs on my arms stand on end. This story, the one that carved that scar, began a decade ago, when I was a naive 20-year-old, with a scream that shattered the deceptive calm of a Sunday afternoon in our family home. A scream that was the prelude to my exile. My money, my college fund, it's gone, it's all gone. The voice, high-pitched and laced with a theatrical panic I would later come to recognize as one of his hallmarks, belonged to my cousin Marco. He was a year older than me, the cherished only son of my Aunt Elena and Uncle Ricardo. He burst into the living room, a study in manufactured distress. His usually slicked-back hair was artfully tousled, his face a mask of wide-eyed horror, though his eyes, I noted even then, held a flicker of something else. Calculation. Everyone froze. It was late afternoon, that lazy post-lunch lull. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a peaceful scene about to be irrevocably broken. My Aunt Elena, a woman whose affection for me had always been lukewarm at best, clutched at the pearls she always wore, her knuckles white. Uncle Ricardo, a portly man whose joviality often masked a surprising sternness when it came to his son, lowered his newspaper, his brow furrowing. My younger cousins, twins Clara and Mateo, barely teenagers, stopped their squabbling over a game controller and stared, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. I was curled on the worn armchair by the window, lost in a dog-eared novel, a temporary escape from the subtle but constant feeling of being an outsider in this house. I'd lived with them since I was 12, after my parents passed away. They'd taken me in, yes, but it always felt more like an obligation fulfilled than a gesture of love. I was the poor niece, a reminder of my mother, Uncle Ricardo's younger sister, who had married for love, not status, a decision Aunt Elena had never forgiven. Marco's wild, darting gaze, sweeping the room like a searchlight, finally landed on me. It locked, and a chilling certainty settled in my stomach. It was in my drawer, in a locked box. She was the only one in my room today. Sophia! His finger, trembling with what I now see was feigned outrage, jabbed in my direction. My book, a tale of faraway lands and brave heroines, slipped from my nerveless fingers and landed with a soft thud on the carpet. The sound seemed deafening in the sudden charged silence. "What?" I managed, my voice a reedy whisper. "Marco, what are you talking about? I just went in to borrow your phone charger for a minute. Your door was open, and I called out." My own phone, an old dying model, was a source of minor, everyday friction. His voice rose, gaining strength, feeding off the attention. "A minute is all it takes for a thief. You were always snooping, always jealous that I had things, that I was going to college, that Mom and Dad actually wanted me." The cruelty of that last jab was like a physical blow. Aunt Elena, predictably, rushed to her son's side, cooing, "Marco, darling, calm yourself. Are you absolutely certain? Maybe you misplaced it." Her eyes, however, when they flicked to me, were cold, already convinced of my guilt. She had always found me lacking, an inconvenient burden. This, I sensed, was an opportunity for her. "Yes, Mom. I counted it this morning. 5,000. The exact amount for my first semester's deposit and initial expenses. It's gone." He practically spat the words, his gaze unwavering from mine. She took it. I know she did. No one else would. The air in the room grew thick, heavy with unspoken accusations and years of simmering resentments. Uncle Ricardo, a man I had once believed to be fundamentally fair, looked at me, his usual kindly expression replaced by a new hard suspicion. "Sophia, is this true? Did you enter Marco's room without permission? Did you touch his things?" "No, Uncle, I would never steal anything." My voice trembled, not with guilt, but with the horrifying realization of what was happening. I was being framed, and no one was listening. "I told you I just needed his charger. It's right there, on the side table by the sofa." I gestured, my hand shaking, desperate for them to see the truth, the simple, mundane explanation. Marco scoffed. a sneering sound that grated on my nerves. A convenient excuse. You probably put it there after you took the money and stashed it somewhere. He was playing his role to perfection. The aggrieved victim. No one spoke up for me. Not my uncle, whose belief in his son was absolute. Not Clara or Mateo, who exchanged wide, scared glances but remained silent, too young or too intimidated to contradict their older brother and parents. I was utterly alone, outnumbered, and the invisible walls of their judgment were closing in. My aunt's voice, when she finally spoke, was laced with a frosty satisfaction. "We did see you coming out of his room earlier, Sophia. You were there for quite some time." A lie. I'd been in and out in under a minute, but her word against mine? I stood no chance. Uncle Ricardo's face hardened further, the lines around his mouth deepening. "Sophia, I am deeply, profoundly disappointed. This family gave you a home, a roof over your head, food on your table. We treated you like one of our own." The hypocrisy of that statement stung, but I was too overwhelmed to articulate it. "But I didn't do it." Tears, hot and shameful, pricked at the back of my eyes. I fought them back. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break completely. The injustice was a physical weight, crushing the air from my lungs. "Then where's the money, Sophia?" Marco demanded, his voice dripping with venomous triumph. He was enjoying this, relishing his power. "Empty your pockets. Let us see your bag." My hands fumbled as I turned out the meager contents of my jeans pockets. A stray coin, a lint-covered lip balm. I upended my worn backpack. A notebook, a pen, my library book. Nothing. Of course, there was nothing. "She's hidden it already," Marco sneered, addressing his parents. "She's cleverer than she looks. Probably buried it in the garden or passed it to one of her shady friends." Shady friends? I barely had any friends, preferring the company of books to the complexities of teenage social hierarchies where I always felt out of place. The next hour was a torturous blur. My aunt recounted every minor infraction, real or imagined, from my childhood. A broken teacup, a forgotten chore, painting a picture of me as inherently untrustworthy, a cuckoo in their nest. Marco fueled the fire with more accusations, twisting innocent actions into sinister motives. My uncle listened, his face growing progressively colder, his initial flicker of doubt extinguished by the combined force of his wife and son's convictions. My desperate pleas of innocence were drowned out, dismissed as the lies of a caught thief. They didn't even bother to properly search my small attic room. A cursory, dismissive glance was all it received. The verdict had already been delivered in their minds. Finally, Uncle Ricardo, his voice heavy with a pronouncement that felt like a death sentence, spoke. "I cannot and will not have a thief living under my roof betraying our trust like this. You have 1 hour to pack your essential belongings and leave this house." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. My breath hitched. "Uncle, please, you can't mean that. Where will I go? I have nowhere else." Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. "That, Sophia, is no longer our concern," Aunt Elena said, her voice devoid of any compassion. She turned her back on me, a gesture of finality. Marco watched, a small, cruel smirk playing on his lips. He had won. He had excised the inconvenient cousin, the charity case, and solidified his own position as the blameless son. The slammed door of my tiny, sparsely furnished room echoed the finality of their judgment. My room, more a storage space than a bedroom, had always felt temporary. Now, its transience was absolute. I sank onto the narrow bed, the springs groaning in protest. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, a desperate, frantic energy took over. My hands shook so violently I could barely grasp my few clothes, stuffing them haphazardly into my old-school backpack. A worn teddy bear, my last link to my mother, a few faded photographs, the books I couldn't bear to leave. Each item was a testament to a life about to be dismantled. The smell of my aunt's Sunday roast, a rich, savory aroma that usually signified family and comfort, drifted up the stairs. Today it seemed to mock me, a reminder of the warmth and belonging I was being forcibly ejected from. When the hour was up, I walked down the stairs, my backpack slung over one shoulder, my head held as high as I could manage, though inside, my world was crumbling. Marco was waiting in the hallway, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, the picture of smug satisfaction. As I passed him, He pushed himself off the wall and whispered, his voice low and triumphant. "Serves you right, Charity Case. Should have known your place." I didn't look at him. I couldn't. If I had, I might have screamed, or hit him, or shattered into a million pieces. Instead, I focused on the front door, on the act of putting one foot in front of the other. The heavy oak door closed behind me with a soft, definitive click. That sound severed my past, my connections, my fragile sense of security. The cool evening air hit my face, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside. I stood on the porch for a moment, disoriented, the streetlights blurring through the unshed tears. I had nothing but the clothes on my back, a few meager possessions in a bag, and the crushing, unbearable weight of a false accusation. That night, the betrayal didn't just feel like a wound. It felt like an amputation of a part of myself I could never get back. I didn't know then, standing alone on that darkening street, that this brutal ending was, in fact, the violent, painful beginning of a long, arduous journey to finding who I truly was. Far from the shadows of their judgment, the cold seeped into my bones, a chilling premonition of the nights to come. The first few nights after being cast out were a disorienting descent into a harsh reality I was utterly unprepared for. The $20 bill Uncle Ricardo had pressed into my hand as a final dismissive gesture, "For a bus ticket out of town," he'd said, not meeting my eyes. Felt like blood money. It didn't last long. My first night was spent huddled on a cold, unyielding park bench, the city's nocturnal symphony a terrifying soundtrack to my despair. Every rustle of leaves, every distant siren, sent jolts of fear through me. Sleep was impossible, a luxury I couldn't afford when every shadow seemed to hold a threat. The second night, I found the relative anonymity of a 24-hour bus station, the fluorescent lights casting a sickly pallor on everything, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and unwashed bodies. Shame was a constant burning companion, fear a gnawing beast in my gut. I was 20 years old, utterly alone in a sprawling, indifferent city, branded a thief by the only family I had known for the past 8 years. The practicalities of survival hit hard. Hunger was a dull ache that quickly sharpened into a painful cramp. Finding a safe place to simply exist during the day was a challenge. Libraries became a temporary refuge, offering warmth and a place to sit without being questioned, but they closed too early. I learned to make myself invisible, to avoid eye contact, to melt into the urban landscape. After a week of near starvation and sleeping rough, desperation led me to a grimy diner on the city's outskirts, its neon sign flickering like a dying promise. The owner, a burly man named Sal, with eyes that had seen too much, looked me up and down, probably recognizing the scent of desperation. He offered me a job washing dishes, no questions asked, cash in hand at the end of a 10-hour shift. The pay was abysmal, the work relentless and brutal. My hands were quickly raw and blistered from the scalding water and harsh detergent, my back a constant throbbing ache, the clatter of plates, the greasy steam, the endless mountain of dirty dishes. It was a circle of hell, but it was honest work. It was mine, and it meant a hot meal at the end of the day, and enough money to rent a bunk in a crowded, noisy women's shelter. The shelter was a step up from the streets, but barely. I shared a cramped room with 3 other women, each of us carrying our own invisible burdens, running from something, or desperately hoping to run towards something better. We rarely spoke of our pasts. There was an unspoken understanding that some doors were best left closed. Sleep was fitful, punctuated by the cacophony of city noise filtering through the thin windows, the occasional quiet sobs of one of my roommates, the fear of my meager belongings being stolen, the memory of Marco's triumphant smirk, Aunt Elena's cold, dismissive eyes, and Uncle Ricardo's disappointed, condemning face. These images were ghosts that haunted my waking hours and invaded my troubled dreams. They played on a loop, a constant reminder of the injustice, the betrayal. There were countless moments, especially in those early, bleak months, when I almost broke. Times when the sheer weight of loneliness and despair threatened to crush me. Times I wanted to crawl back to their doorstep, beg for forgiveness for a crime I hadn't committed, just to have a roof over my head, a semblance of belonging, to escape the gnawing emptiness. But then, inevitably, Marco's whispered taunt would echo in my mind. "Serves you right, Charity Case." That venomous phrase, more than anything, fueled a different kind of fire within me. It wasn't a blazing inferno of rage, not yet. It was a stubborn, cold ember of resolve, a refusal to be defined by their lies, by their contempt. I would not be the person they had decided I was. I'd see families laughing in the park on my way to the diner, hear the murmur of conversations and the clinking of cutlery from warmly lit apartment windows as I trudged back to the shelter late at night. Each instance was a fresh stab of pain, a reminder of what I'd lost, what had been stolen from me more surely than any $5,000, the simple human need for connection, for acceptance, for a place to call home. Through the sparse, pitying whispers of distant relatives who hadn't entirely cut me off, usually a hurried, hushed phone call from a second cousin who still felt some vestige of familial duty, I heard snippets about Marco. He had, of course, gone to college as planned. His parents were reportedly bursting with pride. He was, by all accounts, living the life I could only dream of, a life built, at least in part, on the foundation of my public disgrace and exile. Looking back, the pattern of their behavior was starkly clear, even before the accusation. Marco was the golden boy, perpetually indulged, his flaws overlooked, his transgressions excused or blamed on others. If a valuable vase shattered, it was an accident, and I was often subtly implicated for being careless or in the way. If his homework wasn't done, it was because he was overburdened with his many talents. I was the convenient scapegoat, the forgetful cousin, the clumsy one, the one who didn't quite fit. The theft accusation wasn't an isolated incident. It was merely the culmination, the most dramatic and damaging manifestation of years of being devalued and dismissed. Aunt Elena had always harbored a poorly concealed resentment for my mother for marrying beneath her, and I, as my mother's daughter, was a constant, unwelcome reminder of that perceived familial slight. Marco's accusation had been the perfect, long-awaited excuse to finally rid herself of me. The years crawled by, each one a testament to sheer grit. 5 of them. 5 years of scraping by, of living on the margins, of slowly, painstakingly rebuilding a life from the ashes of the old one. I worked, endlessly. I saved every spare penny, denying myself even the smallest comforts. The diner job eventually led to a slightly better one as a prep cook. With my meager savings, I enrolled in night classes at a community college. First, I took remedial courses. My early schooling had been inconsistent, and my education had been another casualty of my unsettled upbringing. Then, I discovered an aptitude for numbers, a strange sort of solace in their logic and order. I studied bookkeeping, then basic accounting. The irony wasn't lost on me. Accused of stealing money, I now found a quiet satisfaction in managing it, in its precision and clarity. Slowly, things began to change. I got a job as an assistant bookkeeper in a small, family-run import-export business. Mr. Henderson, the owner, was a kind, elderly man who valued my meticulousness and quiet diligence. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something resembling professional pride. Eventually, I managed to save enough for a deposit on a tiny studio apartment in a nondescript but safe building. It was small, bare, and the walls were thin, but it was mine. My own space, clean and quiet. The simple act of closing and locking my own front door, of knowing I was safe within my own 4 walls, was a luxury I savored every single day. It wasn't much, but it was a world away from the shelter, a testament to my resilience, earned with my own 2 hands, my own integrity stubbornly intact, even if only I and Mr. Henderson truly knew it. The pain of the accusation, the betrayal, hadn't disappeared. It had become a part of me, a dull, persistent ache like an old injury that flares up in bad weather. It was a knot in my stomach when I saw happy families, a shadow in my heart when I allowed myself to think of what I had lost. But it no longer crippled me. Instead, it had forged within me a quiet, unyielding strength. I had learned to rely solely on myself, to trust my own judgment above all else. I built walls around my heart, not of anger or bitterness, but of carefully constructed self-preservation. I had learned the hard way that vulnerability was a dangerous indulgence. I never reached out to my aunt, uncle, or Marco, and they, in turn, never made any attempt to contact me. The silence between us was a vast, unbridgeable chasm, a testament to the finality of their judgment. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, as I was reconciling accounts at my desk in the small office I now managed at Henderson's Emporium. Mr. Henderson had promoted me twice. My work phone, a sleek modern device so different from the one I'd once coveted Marco's charger for, buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another sales call, but something made me answer. Sophia speaking. Henderson Imports. A hesitant, almost shaky voice on the other end. Sophia? Is that really you? My blood ran cold. My fingers tightened on the receiver. I knew that voice. Though 5 years had passed, though it was thinner now, tinged with an unfamiliar note of anxiety, it was unmistakably him. Marco. The meticulously organized spreadsheets on my computer screen blurred. The aroma of coffee brewing in the outer office faded. In an instant, the years melted away. I was 20 again, standing in that suffocating living room, the weight of their collective judgment pressing down on me, stealing my breath. My silence stretched, thick and heavy. I could hear his shallow breathing on the other end of the line. Sophia, it's Marco. Your cousin, Marco. As if I could ever forget. I know who you are, I said finally, my voice flat, carefully scrubbed of all emotion. It was a monumental effort to keep it steady. What could he possibly want? After 5 years of absolute deafening silence, after shattering my life and casting me adrift without a second thought, the question hung in the sterile office air, a sliver of ice forming in my heart. This couldn't be good. After I uttered those 5 flat words, I know who you are, and before he could launch into whatever rehearsed speech he had prepared, I ended the call. My finger decisively pressed the button, severing the connection. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Marco. The sound of his voice, even diluted by the phone line and 5 years of distance, had an almost physical impact, dragging me back to a place of raw pain and humiliation. My carefully constructed composure, the one I wore daily like a suit of armor, threatened to crack. Old wounds, ones I'd thought scarred over, throbbed with fresh agony. The ghosts of that Sunday afternoon swarmed my office. Aunt Elena's disdainful sneer, Uncle Ricardo's disappointed frown, and Marco's triumphant, cruel smirk. I could almost smell the cloying scent of the Sunday roast, feel the crushing weight of their judgment. I pushed back from my desk, my chair scraping harshly against the polished wood floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. I walked to the window, looking out at the bustling city street below, but not really seeing it. My city, the city that had been my harsh teacher and, eventually, my proving ground. What did he want? The question ricocheted around my mind. It couldn't be a social call. Not after all this time. Not after what they'd done. There had been no apologies, no remorse, no attempt at reconciliation in 5 years. People like Marco didn't call out of the blue to make amends. They called when they needed something. Money, most likely. Had his charmed life finally hit a snag? Had the golden boy stumbled? A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't just the old pain resurfacing. It was something else. Something new. A flicker of resolve? No, it was more than that. It was a dawning awareness of a shift in power, an opportunity I hadn't sought, but which had nonetheless presented itself. My mind, trained by years of meticulous bookkeeping and strategic financial planning for Mr. Henderson, began to work, sifting through emotions, analyzing possibilities. I thought of the girl I had been, young, vulnerable, easily broken. The girl who had wept on park benches and scrubbed greasy pots until her hands bled. The girl they had created with their cruelty. And then I thought of the woman I had become, resilient, self-sufficient, strong in her quiet way. He wanted to meet. The thought, which initially filled me with dread, now sparked a different kind of energy. Fine, we would meet. But it would be on my terms, in my world, not his. I wouldn't be dragged back into the suffocating confines of their family drama, their distorted reality. The old Sophia might have reacted impulsively, with anger or tears. But the new Sophia, the one forged in the crucible of hardship, understood the value of calculation, of emotional intelligence. This wasn't about screaming revenge or tearful recriminations. My victory, if it was to be won, wouldn't be loud or messy. It would be quiet, precise, and utterly devastating in its truth. I spent the rest of the day in a state of heightened awareness. Every task, every calculation, every email seemed sharper, more focused. Beneath the surface of my professional calm, my mind was a whirlwind, replaying memories, dissecting Marco's character. I remembered countless instances of his entitlement, the way he'd expect others to clean up his messes, the casual arrogance with which he treated service staff, the subtle ways he'd undermine me to his parents even when we were children. I recalled Aunt Elena's constant, passive-aggressive criticisms of my clothes, my manners, my very existence, always veiled as constructive advice. These memories no longer just brought pain, they brought clarity. They reinforced the pattern of their behavior, the ingrained injustice that had culminated in my expulsion. My strategy began to coalesce, not born of malice, but of a deep, unyielding need for a specific kind of justice, the justice of acknowledged truth. He was coming to me for help, a desperate man. This was the inversion of dependency I never, in my wildest imaginings, thought I'd witness. He, who had once held all the power, was now in a position of supplication. He was about to walk willingly into my arena. I would let him speak. I would let him lay out his desperation, his carefully constructed narrative of woe. I would listen patiently. And then, when he was at his most vulnerable, when he believed he might actually sway me, I would present him with the bill for my stolen youth, my shattered innocence, my years of struggle. Not a bill payable in currency. I had earned my own money, more than he likely imagined, but a bill payable in the currency of truth, of accountability. My weapon wasn't going to be a fabricated lie or a trumped-up charge. It was going to be the unvarnished, unassailable truth of what he had done, what they had all done, and the undeniable fact of who I had become, not just despite them, but perhaps, in a twisted way, because of them. He thought he was coming to ask for a favor from the broken, pathetic girl he'd so easily cast aside. He was about to meet the woman she had been forced to become, a woman whose quiet strength he couldn't possibly comprehend. The next morning, I didn't wait for him to call back. I took control. I composed a brief text message. I chose the venue carefully. The Oak Room, an upscale but understated restaurant downtown, a place I occasionally used for important business lunches with Mr. Henderson's clients. It was a world away from the greasy diner where I'd started, a world away from the cramped, judgmental atmosphere of their suburban home. It was a place that spoke of my success, my resilience, my transformation. 1 p.m. today. The Oak Room. Be on time. Short, direct, no room for negotiation. His reply was almost instantaneous. Yes. Okay. Thank you, Sophia. I'll be there. Thank you. The words, coming from him, felt alien, almost obscene. He had no earthly idea what he was thanking me for, or what awaited him. He was thanking me for the opportunity to walk into his own reckoning. I selected my outfit with care, a sharply tailored navy blue dress, low heels that clicked with quiet authority on the floor, minimal jewelry. My hair was styled in a sleek, professional chignon. I wanted to project competence, composure, and an unshakable sense of self. I wanted him to see, instantly, that I was not the disheveled, heartbroken girl he remembered. The hours leading up to 1 p.m. were a strange mix of icy calm and a thrumming, low-level anxiety. I replayed the confrontation in my mind, not the words I would say, but the feeling I wanted to project. Strength, dignity, and an unshakable hold on the truth. I wasn't seeking to destroy him financially. Life, it seemed, was already doing a fine job of that. I was seeking something far more fundamental, the acknowledgement of the wrong, the shattering of his self-deception. The price of his betrayal wasn't monetary. It was his conscience, should he still possess one. It was the comfortable illusion of his own blamelessness, and that, I suspected, would be a far, far steeper price for him to pay than any sum of money. I arrived at the Oak Room at precisely 10 minutes to 1. The maitre d', a polished man named Jean-Pierre who knew me from previous business lunches with Mr. Henderson, greeted me with a respectful nod. Ms. Sophia, a pleasure. Your usual table. Thank you, Jean-Pierre. That would be perfect, I replied, my voice calm, betraying none of the maelstrom of emotions churning beneath the surface. He led me to a quiet corner table, slightly secluded, offering a clear view of the restaurant's entrance but providing a degree of privacy. It was a table that subtly conveyed status and control. I ordered a sparkling water with a slice of lime and settled in, my posture erect, my hands resting lightly in my lap. The restaurant buzzed with the low hum of lunchtime conversations, the clinking of expensive silverware against fine china, the subtle aroma of gourmet food. It was a world of quiet affluence, a stark contrast to the chaotic, emotionally charged environment of my uncle's home, and an even starker contrast to the greasy spoon diner where my climb back had begun. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were an actress about to step onto a stage for a pivotal scene, one I had been rehearsing for 5 long years without even realizing it. Marco walked in precisely at 1 p.m., his punctuality a small surprise. He looked diminished. The youthful arrogance that had once been his defining characteristic was still there, clinging to him like an ill-fitting suit, but it was frayed around the edges, visibly eroded by whatever pressures he was under. His usually immaculate hair was slightly less kempt. His expensive-looking shirt was subtly creased, and there were dark circles under his eyes that his forced smile couldn't quite conceal. He scanned the room, his gaze anxious, until it landed on me. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. Surprise at my composure, perhaps? Or maybe a dawning realization that this wasn't going to be the easy plea he had envisioned. Sophia. He approached the table, pulling out the chair opposite me with a jerky, awkward movement. Thanks again for agreeing to meet me. His voice was thinner than I remembered, lacking its usual confident timbre. I inclined my head slightly, my expression carefully neutral. Marco. I didn't offer a smile, nor did I invite him to sit, though he did so anyway. The waiter, discreet and efficient, materialized to take our orders. Marco, after a moment of flustered indecision, ordered a large plate of pasta carbonara and a glass of red wine, his hand trembling slightly as he pointed to the menu. I stuck to my sparkling water and ordered a light Caesar salad. I had no appetite for food. I was here for a different kind of sustenance. The ensuing small talk was excruciatingly stilted. He fumbled through questions about my life, attempting a tone of casual, cousinly interest that landed with all the grace of a lead balloon. So, what have you been up to all these years? Keeping busy? Yes, I replied, my answers brief, polite, and utterly devoid of personal detail. I work in accounting. Oh, accounting. Right. Good with numbers, then? He said, trying for a jovial note that fell flat. It requires precision, I agreed, letting the word hang in the air. He prattled on about the weather, about some inconsequential city news, his gaze constantly darting around the restaurant, never quite settling on me for more than a few seconds at a time. He seemed profoundly uncomfortable in the polished, quiet elegance of the oak room, out of his depth. I, on the other hand, felt perfectly at ease. This was my territory now. I let him flounder, offering minimal verbal cues, allowing the silences to stretch, each one amplifying his visible discomfort. He picked at his bread roll, shredding it into tiny pieces on the white linen tablecloth. Finally, after the waiter had cleared his barely touched plate of pasta and my equally untouched salad, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if the other diners might overhear his tale of woe. The pretense of casualness evaporated, replaced by a raw, naked desperation. Sophia, look, I wouldn't have called you if I wasn't in serious trouble. Really bad trouble. I waited, my expression unreadable, my gaze steady. I offered no words of encouragement, no sympathetic murmur. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. My business, the import-export thing I started a few years back, it's failing. Badly. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. I made some stupid investments, got talked into some high-risk ventures, took out some pretty substantial loans to cover losses, thinking I could turn it around. But it just got worse. His voice cracked. The bank, they're going to call in the loans. Any day now. If they do, I'll lose everything. The business, my apartment, everything. My parents, Mom and Dad, they've already bailed me out twice. They mortgaged their house the last time. I can't ask them for more. It would destroy them. He looked at me then. His eyes, those same eyes that had once gleamed with malicious triumph as I was cast out, were now wide and pleading, swimming with unshed tears of self-pity. Sophia, I need money. 50,000. That's what it'll take to keep the wolves from the door. to tide me over until I can restructure, find new investors. It would save everything I've worked for." He paused, then added, his voice thick with a desperate sincerity, "I'll pay you back, Sophia. Every single cent. With interest, whatever you want. I swear on my life. You're my only hope. Family. Your family. Please." There it was. The ask. 50,000. A significant sum. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water, the coolness a welcome sensation in my suddenly dry throat. The silence in our little corner of the restaurant stretched, taut and heavy, amplifying the clatter of his fork as he nervously pushed a stray piece of pasta around his plate. His desperation was a palpable thing, a rank, cloying smell in the otherwise refined air of the oak room. 50,000, I repeated, my voice quiet, almost meditative, giving no hint of my internal reaction. That's a considerable amount of money, Marco. I know it is, but I'm good for it, Sophia, I promise, he insisted, leaning further across the table, his eyes practically begging. You're doing well, right? Accounting? You must be comfortable. This would be a lifeline for me. I allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to touch my lips, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Family, I echoed his earlier plea, my tone still soft, yet now imbued with a subtle edge of steel. That's an interesting word for you to use, Marco, considering our history. He flinched as if I'd struck him. A dull flush crept up his neck. Sophia, look, I know things were unfortunate in the past. I was young, I was stupid. I said some things, did some things. Unfortunate? I interrupted, my voice still quiet, but sharper now, like the edge of a freshly honed blade. Is that what you call it? Unfortunate? I leaned forward slightly, my gaze unwavering, pinning him in his seat. Do you remember why things were unfortunate in the past, Marco? Do you remember the $5,000? Uncle Ricardo's college fund money? The money you accused me of stealing? His face, already pale, turned a ghastly shade of gray. He visibly recoiled. That was a lifetime ago, Sophia. A misunderstanding. Water under the bridge. Was it a misunderstanding, Marco? I pressed, each word carefully chosen, precisely delivered. Was it a misunderstanding when you stood by and watched Aunt Elena and Uncle Ricardo throw me out onto the street with nothing but the clothes on my back and a $20 bill? Was it a misunderstanding when you sneered in my face and called me a charity case as I walked out the door, my life in ruins because of your lie? Each question was a hammer blow, chipping away at his crumbling facade of denial. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His eyes darted around the restaurant, like a cornered animal desperately seeking an escape route, but there was nowhere for him to run. I don't... Sophia, please. This isn't the time. I'm begging you, he stammered, his voice hoarse. Oh, I think it is precisely the time, Marco. My voice remained even, almost conversational, yet it carried the weight of 5 years of pain, 5 years of silence, 5 years of rebuilding a life he had so carelessly shattered. You see, that $5,000 you accused me of stealing, the money that conveniently paid for your college deposit, that launched your supposedly brilliant life while mine was systematically dismantled? I've had a lot of time to think about that money, Marco. 5 long years, in fact. I often wondered what really happened to it. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. A strangled sound caught in his throat. His Adam's apple bobbed convulsively. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, unhealthy hue. He was visibly trembling now, his hands shaking so much he clasped them together in his lap. The truth was more painful than he imagined, I said softly, the Portuguese phrase a sudden, sharp echo from our shared childhood, a language of home, of family, a language he had desecrated with his lies. The truth was more painful than he imagined. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, uncomprehending horror. It wasn't just the refusal of his loan request he was anticipating now. It was something far more terrifying. It was exposure. It was the unmasking. In my calm, steady gaze, he wasn't seeing the broken, tearful girl he had banished. He was seeing someone who knew, someone who saw him for exactly what he was. You misplaced that money, didn't you, Marco? I continued, my voice a near whisper, yet each word resonated with an undeniable certainty. Or perhaps you borrowed it for something you didn't want your parents to know about, intending to replace it, and then panicked when it was discovered missing. and I was the perfect, convenient scapegoat. The poor orphaned niece who wouldn't be believed, who could easily be disposed of. His carefully constructed world, his image of himself, was visibly crumbling before my eyes. The panic was no longer restrained. It was raw, open, etched on every feature of his face. You built your current predicament, this financial ruin you're facing, on a foundation of lies and cruelty, Marco. Your entire adult life has been predicated on that initial devastating betrayal. You're asking me, the person whose life you willfully destroyed to save your own skin, to now save you from the entirely predictable consequences of your own character, your own actions. I paused, letting the full weight of my words sink into his shattered consciousness. The answer, Marco, is no. I will not give you $50,000. I wouldn't give you 50 cents. His face crumpled completely. The last vestiges of his composure disintegrated. Sophia, you can't. Please. I'll be ruined. Utterly ruined. His voice was a desperate, broken plea. You ruined yourself, Marco, I said, my voice still calm, but utterly final. You did that 5 years ago. This is just the bill finally coming due. With a quiet grace I didn't know I possessed, I stood up. I reached into my purse and placed a crisp $20 bill on the table, enough to cover my salad and water, and perhaps a small portion of his untouched pasta. Consider this my final contribution to the Marco Fund, I said, my voice devoid of malice, only a profound, weary finality. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared up at me, his face a mask of terror and disbelief, his breathing shallow and ragged. The confident, arrogant cousin I had known was gone, utterly vanquished, replaced by a terrified, broken man staring into the abyss he himself had dug. I turned and walked away, calmly, dignified. My heels clicked softly on the polished floor, the sound a quiet counterpoint to the turmoil I was leaving behind me. I didn't look back. As I stepped out of the cool, dim interior of the oak room and into the bright, indifferent afternoon sun, a profound, almost dizzying sense of release washed over me. It wasn't the savage, fist-pumping joy of revenge I might have once fantasized about. It was something lighter, cleaner, more cleansing. It was the distinct, unmistakable feeling of a heavy, invisible chain, one I had unknowingly carried around my heart for 5 long, arduous years, finally, irrevocably, shattering into 1,000 pieces. He had come to me wanting my money, my help, my pity. Instead, I had given him the one thing he could no longer run from, the truth. And in doing so, I hadn't just reclaimed my stolen dignity, I had claimed my freedom. The past, with its bitter taste of betrayal and injustice, no longer had its insidious hooks in me. I was finally, truly, blessedly free. The road ahead was mine to pave, unburdened.